about malignant diseases of the female genital tract. So that will cover, kasi last week, I think Dr. Rahul already discussed with you cervix, vagina, vulva, and the uterus. Now we'll go through the ovary, fallopian tubes, and the peritoneum, plus gestational trophoblastic diseases. So the reference will be comprehensive gynecology. That will be chapters 33 and 34, I think. And then the lecture that I'll be sharing with you. So, medyo mahaba, but let's see para ma-cover natin yung 2 chapters. So I hope you'll be able, after this lecture, you'll know the epidemiology of ovarian carcinoma. Fallopian and peritoneal is similar to ovarian, and then gestational trophoblastic disease. Identify the risk factors for these conditions, recognize the signs and symptoms, and you'll be able to choose the appropriate tools, diagnostic tools, to help you diagnose the condition and plan the appropriate management. So here you'll see the global statistics of ovarian cancer, and it remains as the leading cause of cancer mortality from gynecologic cancers. So in gynecologic meaning sa uterus, ovary, and the cervix, vagina, and the vulva. So in 2021, you'll see here approximately 21,000 women were diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and about 14,000 already died from the disease. The rate of new cases and death has not changed through the years. So same pa rin siya talaga. In the Philippines, it has affected about 5,000 women in 2020, and it ranks 10th as the most common cancer site for both sexes. So nakalagay kasi both no, pero wala naman ang male ng ovary. But for the epidemiological studies, number 10. Then it's the 5th leading cause of cancer among females. Number 1 would still be breast cancer. So this is the classification of ovarian tumors. Nasa compregyne naman ito. So epithelial tumors are the most common ovarian neoplasm that accounts for about 2/3 of all ovarian neoplasm. So you have your high-grade serous tumor. This is the most common subtype. And this is followed by germ cell tumors, which occurs more frequently in the younger population. The most common germ cell tumor is the mature cystic teratoma, or the dermoid cyst. And the most common malignant transformation for the germ cell tumor is dysgerminoma. There are 2 hypotheses for the pathogenesis of high-grade serous carcinoma, and in the first mechanism, this is what we previously know, that yung incessant ovulation, wherein the normal ovarian surface epithelium or your inclusion cyst, which it either proceeds to the high-grade pathway with no perceivable intermediate pathology, meaning from benign, it jumps straight to a high-grade serous carcinoma, unlike the other pathway where there is from benign, you go through low-grade or your borderline, and then it becomes a malignant. So yung first, type 1, is the incessant ovulation theory that we all know, where the ovarian surface epithelial cells, they undergo repeated stress because of the ovulation through multiple rounds of ovulation, di ba? Monthly, you have ovulation leading to inflammation, there is DNA damage, and the initiation of tumor genesis. This hypothesis was in part supported by the evidence on the decreased risk of ovarian cancer for women who uses OCP because it inhibits complete ovulation. The other evidence that supported the correlation between the number of lifetime ovulation cycles and the increased in ovarian cancer incidence is pregnancy. So if you have increase in parity, di ba, nagsastop din yung ovulation. So those who are multiparous, they have decreased risk for ovarian cancer compared to nullipara. So the second theory, which has gained much traction over the past decade, is what we call the progression model, in which ovarian cancer precursors develop in the fimbria of the fallopian tube. So from occult serous tubal intraepithelial carcinoma prior to metastasizing to the ovary. So due to the aggressive nature of your high-grade serous carcinoma and the presence of early genomic instability, it is hypothesized that high-grade serous ovarian tumors can be metastatic from the fallopian tube instead of a primary tumor. So to reduce the risk of your high-grade carcinoma of the ovary, especially in women with BRCA mutation, that actually for the carriers of the BRCA mutation, it is beneficial to undergo your risk-reducing surgeries like your BSO. So I'll talk about that later. So here you'll see also a nice graphic representation of the ovarian microenvironment and the initiation of epithelial cancer. So here we hypothesize that the microenvironment in the cortex of the ovary, which is subjected to chronic inflammation due to either incessant ovulation or other causes like infection, it induces dysplasia or dysplastic changes in the epithelial cells in the ovarian stroma, and that this will lead to DNA damage. And then that will induce tumor genesis. Here naman is a good illustration that depicts what I mentioned about the serous tubal intraepithelial carcinoma that arises from the fimbria of the fallopian tube. So if you see here, nandun siya sa dulo. And then it will just cross over because the ovary by location is near the fimbriae of the fallopian tube. So there is drop metastasis towards that area. What's important to note here is the P53 signature, which is the preneoplastic lesion that was identified for this condition. Nice to know na lang naman yun. So you don't have to, hindi yun lalabas sa exam. Okay. So here naman is a good illustration on bakit pagka may ovarian cancer, there is ascites. So because of the transcelomic metastasis dun sa loob. So yung A would be how there is buildup of ascites. This is triggered by the primary tumor itself. So there is increased capillary permeability, there is obstruction of the lymphatic drainage, and there is overall decrease in the oncotic pressure out of the peritoneal cavity. So there's increased in the fluid inside the peritoneal abdominal cavity. In B, the ovarian cancer cells experience the surrounding extracellular matrix stiffness within the primary tumor. So spiroid cells aggregate within the ascites, and there's potential metastatic sites, which are all the organs in the abdominal cavity. So the shear stress stimulation via the interstitial fluid flows within this ovarian tumor and the ascitic fluid, and this flow is triggered by gravity kasi syempre nakatayo. So and the bodily movements normally, di ba, meron siyang parang clockwise rotation of the peritoneal fluid inside the abdomen. So any changes there, for example, change in the diaphragmatic pressure from breathing and the movements of the other organs, it like during digestion, it also help in the movement of the ascitic fluid, movement towards other organ structures of the metastatic cells. Now, C is transcelomic metastasis. So it starts with the exfoliation of the cancer cells from the ovary, which is the primary tumor site. So cancer cells within the ascites will evade actually the immune system and detach from the spheroid cells to avoid anoikis resistance. Yung program cell death of the metastatic cells inside. So, ito yung graphic picture. So, the risk of women for epithelial ovarian cancer is primarily based on the family history or confirmed mutation within the family. So women at average risk are typically those similar to the general population. So wala silang risk for or family history of ovarian cancer. Women at increased risk are those with a family history of ovarian cancer or breast cancer or colon cancer. Low risk or high risk women would have evidence of a BRCA1 or a BRCA2 mutation and a Lynch mutation. So family history and genetic mutations are the most commonly recognized risk factors for the development of ovarian, fallopian tube, and peritoneal cancer. You'll see here in the table that if you have BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutation in the family, you have a 40 to 46% lifetime risk of developing the three carcinomas. If you have Lynch syndrome, you have 9 to 12% lifetime risk of ovarian cancer. So it's good that you have a pedigree and know the your family history. Women who are yung history of infertility have 1.53 risk of developing ovarian cancer because of the incessant ovulation theory. And those who had ovulation for a longer time, meaning we have early menarche and late menopause, it has the same risk as those women who never got pregnant. Other risk factors include the following. Note here yung ovulatory drugs because it induces inflammation by pushing ovulation. So it will course through the incessant ovulation or your type 1 pathway for ovarian cancer. If you have increased factors, you have protective factors. So what will decrease the risk for ovarian cancer would be doing tubal ligation as a form of contraception, or can be included when a patient has hysterectomy for a benign condition. So it decreases the risk for the relative risk is 0.8 if you do BTL, and the overall risk if you have hysterectomy with salpingectomy will be that one. So if you patient uses OCP, which decreases ovulation, the odds of having ovarian cancer is just 0.17. Similar with pregnancy, and then if the patient will do breastfeeding after a pregnancy. So we'll go through several questions that will help you understand more on how to prevent ovarian cancer. We have to note that there's no screening tool for ovarian cancer, but there are factors that I've mentioned that could help you counsel patients and yourself regarding preventing ovarian cancer. So, for example, this is the reason for yung table kanina. So, among women who desire tubal ligation and those who are undergoing hysterectomy for benign condition, will this reduce the risk or prevent ovarian cancer? So, we have several studies already, a meta-analysis that would actually tell everyone that it indeed decreases the risk of ovarian cancer for around 50%, diba? For average risk women. That's why the recommendation now is that you can advise women who desire tubal ligation instead of doing BTL, then remove the whole fallopian tube already, including the fimbrial end. And even for women who will undergo hysterectomy for benign lesions, you advise removing the whole fallopian tube, bilateral fallopian tube, to reduce the risk for ovarian cancer. Now, for high-risk individuals, as I've mentioned, these are women with BRCA1 or 2 mutation or HNPCC syndrome or multiple ovarian and or breast cancers in the first or second degree blood relatives. What can we do? Should we advise them to undergo risk-reducing salpingo-oophorectomy or bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy? So there are several recommendations already. Back 2017 pa ito, that for women 35 to 40 years old with BRCA1 and 40 to 45 years old for women with BRCA2 mutation, it is advised that they undergo risk-reducing salpingo-oophorectomy. But there are women who wouldn't want to undergo such procedures. So what can we do for them? What can we offer for them? So we can offer use of OCP because this is associated with a 50% reduction of ovarian cancer in this population. So for the mutation carriers. Now, I mentioned kanina, di ba, yung you should know your pedigree. And if one, kunwari sa family would have a condition similar to this one, would you advise genetic testing? So it should be advised that you undergo genetic testing and counseling. This should be offered for women with positive screening tools because this will help the family in in their future direction in addressing the risk for the family. So how about for average risk women, yung general population, should ovarian cancer screening be recommended? So routine screening either by CA125 or ultrasonography and pelvic examination or a combination of the three is not recommended among asymptomatic premenopausal or postmenopausal women who are of low to average risk for ovarian cancer. So wala siyang benefit. Kaya nga I mentioned kanina, di ba, wala siyang screening tool unlike cervical cancer that you do HPV DNA testing or your cervical cancer screening similar to endometrial CA na wala din siyang screening tool. But merong models that can help para lang matulungan, di ba, no? Ma-decrease pa yung risk of developing ovarian cancer. So how about for high-risk individuals? Should ovarian cancer screening be recommended? It may be advised to women who really are at risk, those with familial or hereditary ovarian syndrome like your BRCA mutation carriers, and who wouldn't want to undergo the risk-reducing bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. So knowing those, if a patient comes, for example, kasi dumadating ang patient usually as symptomatic na. So number one would be the presence of a pelvic mass at physical examination, or the patient would come with non-specific signs and symptoms of abdominal enlargement, early satiety, abdominal pain, which is really non-specific, diba? So yung presence of a pelvic mass during your physical examination is the most important sign of a probable epithelial ovarian cancer. So I've mentioned it's fairly non-specific, the signs and symptoms, and often occur after the disease has already spread throughout the abdominal cavity. So it's important for us to do comprehensive medical and family history from a woman with these symptoms, with particular attention to the risk factors and symptoms indicative of malignancy. So here is a tabulation of the common signs and symptoms that we see for women with ovarian, fallopian tube, or peritoneal cancer. So very non-specific because lahat naman yan pwedeng GI pathology pala siya or other condition. But if you have 3 or more or 4 or more signs and symptoms, that the probability of having an epithelial ovarian cancer or any type of ovarian cancer increases. Now, for the pelvic findings, it's very hard. Kasi benign and malignant, pwede siyang similar. Ang difference na lang dyan would be yung how fast yung rapidity of the growth ng tumor. For example, from 1 month lang, they notice na lumaki na talaga yung tiyan. If on physical examination, you already noted nodules or tumors on the cul-de-sac, uterocecal ligaments on your rectovaginal examination. Ascites is not specific for malignancy because fibroma, if you have your Meiggs syndrome, so you have ascites, you have pleural effusion, but ovarian mass that is benign, which is a fibroma. So, kaya either pa rin siya. So, what do we need? So, it's really high index of suspicion in the diagnosis for history and PE, but you have diagnostic tests. So, you have to choose appropriate diagnostic workup for you to confirm the diagnosis. So number one will be your grayscale or your 2D transvaginal ultrasound with color Doppler. This is what we primarily use for the evaluation of adnexal masses. What do we see? So you have your B and your M features. So B features, it's unilocular, can be some would have solid features, can be multiloculated, but less than 100 millimeters. There's no color flow if it's benign. And if it's malignant, the red ones there. And then this would help you to guide or to triage your patients. If on ultrasound, there's one or more M features in the absence of a B features, then the mass most likely is malignant. Then you can refer to your friendly oncologist to help you with the management of your patients. Next, besides your ultrasound, then you can also request for other imaging studies. What is the role of your CT scan? You have your MRI, you have your PET CT, even your PET MRI can help you in the diagnosis of epithelial ovarian malignancy. Although this imaging should not be routinely used as a primary imaging means to assess malignancy state of ovarian cancer, it's a good adjunct to ultrasound, which is cheaper, di ba, no? Especially for uncertain or problematic cases and to determine the extent of the disease. Example, you have a very huge mass, then the likelihood of a probable extension to the other abdominal organs is there. So that will help you in your preoperative evaluation if this is operable or not. Do you need other services to help you out in your management for this case? Is there already a hydronephrosis? Do you need a urologist to help you out in the management and the like? So there are also prediction models that would help one in the diagnosis of epithelial ovarian cancer. First is your risk malignancy index prediction model where we use ultrasound, the menopausal status, and CA125. So hindi ko pa na-mention yung tumor markers. So if the score after multiplying all is more than 200, then most likely this is malignant. You also have your ROMA or your risk of ovarian malignancy algorithm where we use the menopausal status, CA125 and HE4. So it will tell you if it's high risk or low risk for an ovarian malignancy. Other prediction models would be your LR1 or your logistic regression. We don't usually use this one, and LR2. Now what we use is the IOTA adnex model. This adnex model includes 3 clinical and 6 ultrasound features to differentiate between benign, borderline, early, and advanced stage invasive disease and secondary metastatic tumor. The threshold for the IOTA adnex is a 10% risk of malignancy. This distinguishes benign from malignant mass with a sensitivity of around 97%. So this prediction model is applicable to women with adnexal masses planned for surgery and includes the judgment regarding preoperative referral to a gynecologic oncologist or other specialties for the appropriate management of the case. So next would be after imaging, you may request for tumor markers that will help you guide anong klaseng tumor ba siya. Kasi marami siyang markers eh. Lahat naman yan non-specific din because, kunwari, for example, CA125, hindi lang naman yan sa ovarian cancer. It can also increase in pregnancy, benign condition like myoma, increases if you have ascites, you have infection. CA19-9 is not specific for ovarian cancers that are multiloculated or mucin containing. It also increases if you have GI pathology like your pancreatic CAs, hepatobiliary conditions. So for ovarian cancer, I've tabulated the tumor markers that may be requested based on the age of the patient. So for children or adolescent, I mentioned that the more common tumor will be your germ cell tumors and sex cord tumors instead of your epithelial. Then you have to request for your LDH, AFP, beta HCG, and inhibin. But for premenopausal and postmenopausal women, more common will be epithelial tumors, then you request for the tumors related to that. So this is summary of the tumor markers that we request if we, based on our history and PA and the ultrasound findings, ano yung i-request mo na tumor markers that will help you in the management of the case. So for epithelial tumors, that histology would be this one. We request for CA125 or CA19-9 plus a CAA because mataas yung risk na pwedeng GI pathology, di ba, sa abdominal cavity. So we can do a ratio of your CA125 and the CAA. If it's more than 25, then most likely it's ovarian in nature. For germ cell tumor, you may request for AFP, LDH, and inhibin. Now, now, how do we plan the appropriate management at the primary surgery? Because surgery is the primary, di ba, treatment for ovarian malignancy, and then we stage the disease based on the surgical pathologic factors. So what is the recommended surgical approach? We do an exploratory laparotomy, and then we take out the peritoneal fluid, have it examined, the cytology. We do unilateral or bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy depending on the age of the patient, with or without total hysterectomy, and complete surgical staging or cytoreductive surgery, wherein we remove all the tumors. Our goal is zero residual because that affects the survival of the patient. So that includes lymph node dissection of the pelvis, para-aortic lymph node dissection, sampling. It includes removal of the omentum and the peritoneal surfaces affected. So we stage the disease based on the histopath result, which areas were involved. So if it's limited to the ovary, then it's stage 1. It's further divided if it involves 1 ovary, 2 ovaries, or if the ovarian ovary has ruptured preoperatively, intraoperatively, or there's already malignant cells on peritoneal washing. So if it's only 1 ovary affected, it's 1A, 2 ovaries affected, it's 1B, provided for both there's no tumor on the ovarian surface. The peritoneal fluid cytology is negative for malignancy. It's a 1C, either 1 or 2 ovaries if there's surgical spill, meaning during your adhesiolysis, there's intraoperative rupture of the tumor. 1C2 if the tumor already ruptured before the surgery, or there's already tumor on the ovarian surface. 1C3 if there's positive malignant cells already on the acidic fluid or peritoneal washing. It's a stage 2 tumor if the tumor involves 1 or more both ovaries with extension to the pelvis. What are the pelvic structures? It includes the bladder and the rectosigmoid. So any tumor that involves those areas and parametria, pelvic side walls, then it's a stage 2. 2A, if it involves extension to the reproductive structures only. So from the ovary, it now involves the fallopian tube, the nearest structure, and the uterus. 2B, if there's an extension already to the other pelvic intraperitoneal tissues, which I mentioned, the bladder, peritoneum, rectosigmoid, pelvic side walls, parametria. Stage 3, if it involves already the abdominal structures. So 3A1, if involves the lymph nodes. 3B would be macroscopic extension that is less than 2 cms. And if it's more than 2 cms in greatest dimension, then it's stage 3C. So it includes also extension to the tumor capsule, so sa taas pa lang. But if it's parenchymal, then it becomes stage 4 disease. Stage 4 is distant metastasis excluding peritoneal metastasis. Basta nasa abdomen is it's still stage 3. So 4A, if you have positive pleural fluid cytology from the pleural fluid, if the patient has pleural effusion. 4B, if you have distant metastasis, that is beyond the abdomen. So yung inguinal lymph nodes will be considered stage 4B, supraclavicular lymph nodes, that's 4B, parenchymal liver disease, that's already 4B. So here is a good picture para mas madali nyo matandaan. Stage 1, if it's still kung ano yung primary na organ involved. Stage 2, if in spread, pero nandun pa rin siya sa pelvis. It becomes abdominal, so beyond the axis na siya, then stage 3 na siya. Beyond the abdomen, that's stage 4. So if, for example, I've mentioned sa CT scan that hindi pala siya operable. So do we still proceed with surgery? No. Management of ovarian cancer can be primarily cytoreductive surgery or can be interval debulking, meaning we do neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So mauuna muna yung chemotherapy before the standard treatment ng surgery. So that's neoadjuvant. So yung isa naman is primary cytoreductive and then afterwards you do the adjuvant chemotherapy. So para maintindihan niyo yung nomenclature, di ba? So, for example, on opening up, we already see, minsan kasi CT scan, sasabihin parang wala siyang peritoneal carcinomatosis. But on opening up or intraoperatively, we see this and we can't remove or we can't commit that we'll be able to do R0 or no residual disease or more than 2 cms yung maiiwan na tumor, then we won't proceed because there's no survival benefit if you leave behind more than 2 cm na tumor. So what do? Is just we do biopsy and then proceed with chemotherapy first for 3 to 4 cycles and then go back again for the surgery so that we'll be able to remove everything and then do adjuvant chemotherapy again. So what do we usually give? If it's epithelial tumor, we give taxane and platinum. So paclitaxel and carboplatin, usually every 21 days for 6 cycles. This one, your BEP, is what we use for germ cell tumors. So after cytoreductive surgery, besides intravenous or systemic chemotherapy, we may also do your hyperthermic intraepithelial chemotherapy. So after the surgery is still open, then we give chemotherapy. Nandun sa loob ng tiyan, ilalagay yung chemotherapy and there's a machine that will help circulate the chemotherapy within the abdominal cavity and then remove everything and then close the abdomen. The other one is intraepithelial chemotherapy. Iko-close mo na yung abdomen after 2 to 3 weeks, then no. The following day, we already give chemotherapy intraperitoneally. So maglalagay ng port inside, close yung abdomen, and then ilalagay yung fluid inside with chemotherapy, and then hindi tatanggalin unlike yung HIPEC. So it's retained within the abdominal cavity, i-absorb siya through the peritoneum. 2 drugs din yung ibinibigay. So yun yung pwedeng adjuvant treatment besides your systemic chemotherapy. Targeted therapy are medications that are kaya nga targeted. For example, it targets the vessels. So may mga specific na drugs that will help the chemotherapeutic agent in combination with that will be your targeted. So pwede siyang vascular endothelial growth factor ang ita-target niya para matulungan, ma-decrease yung amount ma-decrease yung risk of developing recurrence. Pwede ding PARP inhibitor, meaning oral therapy if you have receptors for the following drugs. Radiotherapy is limited, unlike for endometrial and cervical cancer. Sa ovarian cancer, very limited yung data regarding or evidence regarding its benefit for the management for ovarian cancer. Parang merong nag-message. Okay. Next. Fallopian tube and peritoneal cancer, ang diagnosis and treatment are similar to ovarian cancer, so we won't repeat that. I think na-differentiate lang sila through, histology. So, after ng surgery, di ba, ipapabiopsy, doon nalalaman kung primary ba siya from the fallopian tube, primary ba siya from ovary, or primary ba siya from the peritoneum. Because if pag-open mo, puro tumor na siya lahat, mahirap identify where is the primary tumor. So by histology, they will know. For example, if it's fallopian tube carcinoma, if the main tumor is in the tube, it arises nasa loob, sa endosalpinx. There is transition from a benign into a malignant. So may normal na tube, merong borderline na tube, or stick pa lang and then malignancy. And both the ovaries and the uterus are normal. Pag primary peritoneal, both ovaries naman are normal. Pwede rin silang enlarged pero benign ang condition. This time it involves extra ovarian sites, so most of the time yung peritoneal cavity ang source ng carcinoma. So it's histologic diagnosis. So you'll just have to check sa pathologists kasi you'll rely on their findings. Plus, of course, you have to talk to them. Kasi kung kunwari ikaw nakita mo doon na mukha naman pala talagang iba, yung primary site, you can talk it out. But yung management naman will be the same. So you give chemotherapy after a surgery for 6 cycles and then monitor the patient every 3 months with tumor markers and imaging because the risk of recurrence is high, especially for high-grade serous carcinoma. Okay, now we'll go half na. We go with gestational trophoblastic disease. So what is GTD? So it's a heterogeneous spectrum of diseases of abnormal trophoblastic in proliferation. So it can be benign to pre-malignant to a malignant condition. So here, from Compregyne naman to, yung WHO classification of your GTD. For this morning, we'll talk about H moles and gestational trophoblastic neoplasia. So each mole, hydatidiform mole, can be a complete mole or a partial mole. Complete mole, halos the same naman yung kanilang incidence in 1 to 3 in 1,000 pregnancies, both for partial and complete mole. Risk factors would be extreme of ages of the mother. So yung young women and then the old, more than 40 years old na nagiging pregnant, mataas yung risk nila of developing a molar pregnancy. If the patient has a previous history of a molar gestation, then her future risk of having a molar pregnancy is high compared to those women na walang history of a molar pregnancy. Diet, they say that you have vitamin A deficiency, there is increased risk for developing molar gestation. And if there's a family history also of a molar gestation, then the risk is also increased, but hindi naman ganun kataas. So here is a comparison of the histopathologic and cytogenetic features of a complete mole and a partial mole. Ang difference lang naman yan, yung partial mole, meron pa siyang fetal structures. So histology, pag meron kang ano yung mga structures na makikita mo sa microscope na ibig sabihin part ng fetus. So ano yon? Pwedeng merong unnucleated RBCs. So baka merong placenta pa. Unlike complete mole na wala silang embryonic tissue. Meron pa ring iba na tawag dito na pathognomonic of complete mole. So yung karyotype number 1 will be 46XS compared to yung triploid pagka partial mole. Beta HCG or your serum HCG is higher in complete mole compared to your partial mole. Genetic parentage will be paternal for complete mole and bipaternal for partial mole kasi triploid nga dito sa partial mole. Yung chorionic villi is more pronounced in complete mole. So, mas maganda yung chorionic villi, mas may hyperplasia because purely, mole compared to your partial mole. Minsan may baby pa siyang kasama talaga pag partial mole. So, the clinical features, whether it's complete or partial, is the same. So, they present with vaginal bleeding, with or without the passage of molar vesicles, especially in the first trimester. Sometimes they have large fourdate uterus, especially for complete mole. There is absence of fetal movement if they go through more than first trimester. There is anemia if the patient has several occurrences of vaginal bleeding. They have increase in blood pressure before 20 weeks AOG. If it's a complete mole and the beta HCG is really high, there is presence of your thecal lutein cyst on sonography. Patients would complain of hyperemesis gravidarum more than the usual hyperemesis that they usually feel for a normal pregnancy because of the elevated talaga yung beta HCG. They also have hyperthyroidism because yung alpha subunit of your beta HCG is homologous to the thyrotropin-releasing hormone. So yung beta HCG isoform seen in your complete mole, they have greater affinity for your thyrotropin-stimulating hormone receptor than your normal beta HCG. So that will cause excessive thyroid stimulation. So some patients will have hyperthyroidism. Ito mahirap pag yung may respiratory distress na because yung mole, yung trophoblast can actually escape from sa uterus, go through the veins or the vessels and go through. Para lang din siyang amniotic fluid embolism that we see sa pregnant. So, pwede din siyang mangyari. So, ang presentation na lang pwedeng pumunta sa ER is difficulty of breathing. So, how do you diagnose? 2 lang naman yung kailangang i-request primarily. Will be your serum beta HCG, because if it's really elevated than the normal values for normal pregnancy, then you suspect it's smaller pregnancy. Number 2 would be ultrasound. So actually, ang unang-una mo na i-request naman talaga is ultrasound because that's the standard imaging modality for pregnancy and molar pregnancy. Kasi dadating yan, missed period with vaginal bleeding. So in a reproductive age group, ang una mong gagawin, di ba, pregnancy test to confirm pregnant ba siya o hindi. Next will be ultrasound to confirm viable ba yung pregnancy. Intrauterine ba yung pregnancy or molar pala siya. So kung molar siya, what are the features in the ultrasound? So you'll see a snowstorm appearance, para rin siyang honeycomb. So yung features of a complete mole, wala siyang amniotic fluid, puro cyst lang yung makikita, pwedeng may ovarian thecal lutein cyst. Unlike for partial mole, pwedeng merong baby. Tapos may amniotic fluid kasi may baby. Pero abnormal na yung placenta. And then, if you request for serum beta HCG, as I mentioned, increase siya compared to a normal pregnancy. So how do we manage? So apart from the baseline ultrasound and your serum beta HCG, these are the baseline workup that we usually request as part of the preoperative evaluation of patients with molar gestation prior to the definitive management, be it uh, a partial or a complete mole. So, since women usually present, di ba, with vaginal bleeding, the evaluation of the hematologic status is vital. So, question, is there anemia? So, how low is the hemoglobin? So, blood typing then is also needed so that your blood products are prepared preoperatively or for correction of anemia. Your Rh factor is also noted, and those who are Rh negative positive or unknown partner will be given Rh immunoglobulin at time of evacuation, since Rhd factor is expressed also on the trophoblast. So we have to check for other vital structures such as the kidneys and the liver through renal and liver function tests. Since the anterior pituitary gland produces glycoproteins that are similar in its alpha subunit, as I've mentioned, for the hyperthyroidism, then you have to check for the thyroid function test. Serum electrolyte should be monitored, especially for those with hyperemesis as a result of the elevated HCG. We also request for baseline chest X-ray to rule out any metastatic lesion. What we usually see there are cannonball lesions on chest X-ray. Next is how do we manage? So surgical evacuation, either by suction curettage or hysterectomy with mole in situ, is the definitive management for molar gestation. The preferred approach for the young who is still desirous of pregnancy with molar gestation is suction curettage. Now, for women high risk of developing post-molar gestational trophoblastic neoplasia, we also give prophylactic chemotherapy. Now, the general guidelines in performing suction curettage, which is the preferred method across ages, should be includes the following. So, it's important you do informed consent. You have to be vigilant that blood products are available. GA is the preferred anesthesia for, especially for larger uterine size, with a uterine size that is more than or equal to 14 weeks AOG. The position should be semi-Fowler's dorsal lithotomy, not the usual dorsal lithotomy position. We observe proper aseptic technique like in any other procedures. And since it's important that you have a good visualization and identification of the cervix before you do mechanical cervical dilatation. We either use Heger's or your mechanical dilators, or we insert laminaria as a mechanical dilator also preoperatively. It is important that the cervical dilatation would allow a 12 millimeter cannula to be inserted. So we introduce the cannula gently so as to avoid perforation. So we give oxytocin at the start of the curettage. Because sobrang soft, talagang mataas yung risk, pwede siyang ma-perforate. So the most dependent portion of the molar products is suctioned first. So parang pag pinasok mo pa lang sa cervix, dapat hindi mo siya through and through. So start pa lang doon when you pass through the internal os, you can start the suction curettage already. You do it slowly, rotating it 180 degrees on each side in a gentle and in and out motion until you are able to remove all the products of conception. During this time, you will notice that there is gradual involution of the uterus, and once everything is evacuated, you stop the suction machine, and then you have to remove the cannula slowly, and then you perform suction, sharp curetting. So mag-curettage ka pa. So post-suction curettage, what should be done? We have to recognize the following during and immediately post-evacuation in order to give appropriate and timely treatment to prevent catastrophic complications. Number one will be uterine perforation. So kung hindi naman nagbabago yung vital signs, then you don't have to explore. if there's incomplete evacuation, so it's better you check through ultrasound or ultrasound guided so that you'll be able to remove everything. And of course, catastrophic if you have respiratory distress syndrome or you have embolization from that trophoblast, or you have high output cardiac heart failure from hyperthyroidism and probably fluid overload. So the tawag dito, parang may na-miss. Wait ha. So high risk, we classify them as high risk, high datidifong mole if the beta HCG is greater than 100,000. So I mentioned earlier regarding prophylactic chemotherapy. So if we consider them as high risk individuals, then we have to give them prophylactic methotrexate. So these are the things that you have to check to label them as high risk so that we'll be able to give them medication to prevent gestational neoplasia. We also use the Berkowitz scoring. A score of equal 2 or more than 4 is considered as being high risk for malignant transformation. So if the score is 4, for example, your patient, then what do we give? We give methotrexate or actinomycin D, provided that the parameters are normal, because these are considered chemotherapeutic agents. They have side effects, they have complications, so everything should be normal. After giving those, how do we monitor? So serial beta HCG monitoring should be done. However, if we have any of these, you have plateauing of the HCG while monitoring, then there is a probability of a post-molar trophoblastic neoplasia. So 1 week after evacuation, you check for beta HCG, then every 2 weeks until you have 2 consecutive biweekly normal values. Afterwards, you do it every month for 6 months and then every 2 months for the next 6 months. While doing this, it's important that you have a reliable contraception during follow-up. Why? Because pag na-pregnant siya, tataas na rin yung beta HCG, so you will be able to monitor properly. So yung tendency to have malignant transformation is there. So what is the preferred method is that you give your low-dose OCP. Remember that that ovulation may occur when levels are less than 100 MIU per ml and as high as 60% once that the beta HCG is already less than 10. So why low dose OCP instead of the other contraceptive methods is because your OCP can suppress your endogenous LH, and LH and HCG has similar alpha subunit. Pregnancy after molar gestation, so it may be allowed after 6 months, although there are reports of increased risk of another molar gestation. There is limited literature available regarding the reproductive and gestational outcomes of women with previous if she has Mullerian anomalies or other conditions coexisting with a molar gestation. So it's important to counsel the patients, especially after a molar gestation, because of the increased risk of another molar pregnancy. So here is there is an algorithm in CompreGyna that you may use. So for example, after evacuation, how do you monitor? If the beta ECG is normal, then okay na siya. But how about if there is plateauing of your beta HCG? Plateauing means dapat kasi may 10 fall ng beta HCG every time you check. So kung nagpla-plateau siya, then most likely it's a post-molar GTN or a gestational trophoblastic neoplasia. So it can be any of the 4 conditions. So how do you classify them? It's more of histologic. So based sa histology, saka makikita. Kasi yung isa, merong villi, for example, invasive mole, ang choriocarcinoma without villi, but both of them will invade the myometrium. PSTT and ETT are more of the intermediate trophoblasts that they see on histology. So, yun yung magdi-difference sa kanila. Differentiate sa kanila is histologic diagnosis. So here is, I got this also from CompreGyne on how you will diagnose patients with GTN. So you have 4 beta ECG values that is plateauing. So less than or equal to 10% lang yung logfall niya. A rising beta ECG of 10% from the previous. There is already a histologic diagnosis of choriocarcinoma. If you have evidence of metastasis from your X-ray or other imaging modalities. So how do you diagnose GTN? You have a serum beta ECG that is more than 100,000 MIU per ml for invasive mole and choreo-CA. But since PSTT and ETT doesn't secrete much of beta ECG, then their values are less. So you also request for this similar for molar gestation, renal function, hematologic status, and your thyroid function. You also request for your ultrasound to check for invasion. You also do your X-ray. If it's negative, then you have to request for a CT scan. If you see a lung mets that is greater than 1 cm, you also do your MRI or cranial CT scan because of increased risk for cranial metastasis. So this is what is used to stage and classify GTN. So you just score based on the patient and the scoring. If it's more than 6, then it's greater risk for progression. So you the scoring here would if it's 6 or more, then you say it's high risk GTN. If it's less than that, then it's low risk GTN. That will determine the type of medication that you will give. Both actually, you will give chemotherapy, but low risk GTN, you can actually give single agent methotrexate only. For high risk GTN, then you give several or 5 types of medication until the beta HCG becomes normal. So hindi siya katulad ng ovarian cancer that you have 6 lang na sinasabi mo as adjuvant treatment. For GTN, you continue the treatment, yung chemotherapy until you have 3 normal values. So unlike PSTT and ETT, kasi yung GTN na invasive mole and choriocarcinoma are chemosensitive. This one is chemoresistant. That's why if you have this, the mode of treatment is surgery. So it's the cornerstone of treatment for non-metastatic and also for metastatic disease. Pag metastatic, then you have to add chemotherapy kahit alam mo na chemoresistant siya. Basta ang importante, natanggal mo na yung uterus for this one. So how do we monitor patients for low-risk GTN? We do serial beta ECG monitoring monthly for 12 months. For high-risk GTN, we do it every 2 weeks for 3 weeks, then monthly for a minimum of 2 years. For stage 4 disease, we do monthly testing for 2 years. So, basta tandaan, meron siyang monthly monitoring for 2 years. Diba, no? Pag may trophoblastic neoplasia ka na ba? Kasi chemotherapy lang naman siya, di ba? For example, invasive mole choreo-CA. Hindi pa natatanggal yung uterus, you give your chemotherapy. Is there a chance for pregnancy? So kung kunwari ang before na condition is a molar pregnancy, pwede pa siya. Pwede pa rin magbuntis basta nandun pa yung uterus at saka yung ovary. Similar pa rin ang kanilang outcome regardless kung nagkaroon na sila ng molar pregnancy or nagkaroon sila ng GTN. Ang important na lang doon is kailangan may close monitoring if magkakaroon pa ng pregnancy after a neoplasia. So number one will be early ultrasound in the first trimester to confirm na talagang viable na pregnancy siya. And then you have to check the beta-HCG after delivery, 6 weeks to 10 weeks postpartum to rule out a new or a recurrent disease. So that's it. Thank you. 1 minute to go. I hope you learned something this morning. So exam questions will come from the lecture and Compregaine. Good morning.